We now move to studying religion anthropologically, part 2. I mentioned earlier that we are looking at it from the perspective of cultural anthropology. And one thing we know about culture, culture is something that is learned behavior and it's also shared. We learn things about our culture and what it means to be a part of our particular culture from those people around us, from people who raise us, from people that we live among, all of those things, but it's learned and shared. In studying religion anthropologically, we use the tools of anthropology to help us to gain insight into those behaviors and cultures that we identify as being religious. We've talked about previously holism, that in order to understand an entire culture, we look at the different parts of it, the sum parts of it, and that allows us to then gain insight into the culture as a whole. Ethnology is a process we described earlier, and it's related to field work, but whereby an anthropologist goes and spends time with a group doing their participant observation. They may use other things such as surveys, genealogies, many different ways in which to gain information about a culture in order to produce that ethnography that we talked about, or that written description of the work that they've done and the group that it is that they've studied. Another very important concept is that of cultural relativism, and that is the idea that we accept a culture on its own standards. We work very hard not to impose our standards on another. If you think about, for example, the idea of food, there are certain foods in various cultures that are considered delicacies among one group that may be repulsive to another group. But by the terms of cultural relativism, we accept the fact that that's what people like. And that's one of the things that they will eat. And we don't judge them. And we don't look at them as being any better or any less than that. That's a part of the concept of cultural relativism. When we look at religion, the definition spiral, there's so many factors that play into that. When we start asking ourselves, what are things like sacred? What does that mean? What does holy mean? What does the divine mean? What does belief mean? There are many things that as we go through this course, we will ask ourselves what these terms and more mean, spirit being enough. I mentioned earlier that this is a course in something that for many cultures, there is not a word, and there, which leads some scholars to ask the question, where does religion actually exist? Where does it refer to? Does it refer to things in people's minds? Is there something out there, whether it's out in space, whether it's out in the environment or wherever else that is there, that is something real? We will be looking at various ways in which people and cultures attempt to answer these questions, but there's not necessarily a real definition as to whether religion is out there. And ultimately, you'll be left to determine your own conclusion on this particular question. Religion merely inside of us is a part of that conversation. In just a moment, we're going to look at a definition for this particular course for religion that, for me, works. You will see as you pick up any text on the anthropology of religion, any introductory text to cultural anthropology, you'll see a number of definitions for religion, but we're going to look at a definition for this course. But before we do, I wanted to talk about some approaches to defining religion. The first is an operant approach, and that is where we look at those things that can be measured and are observable in a particular culture. For example, if we can count the number of times that a community gathers for a religious gathering or ceremony or celebration, we could look, for example, how many times adherents in a particular culture pray. But those are things that are observable, those are things that are measurable, and oftentimes help in defining religion. Second approach is an analytic approach, where we look at how religion manifests or is expressed in a culture. The third, which is very much related to the analytical approach, is the role that religion plays in a society. There are many cases in which religion may play a central role in society, even to the point that the political leaders and other people are ordained or given sanction or given some type their authority from the religious component. Other societies where religion may not have much of a role at all, but how it functions in a particular society is another way in which we operate to define religion. And then finally, the essentialist approach. What things are necessary for something to be called or considered a religion? Does it mean that there are deities that are a part of the religion? Is it the fact that there are large numbers of people that follow this? Is it something that has been old and passed down for many generations until we finally recognize it as a religion? But what are the essentials that are a part of that particular religion? And finally, we come to the definition that, as I mentioned, will suffice for this course, and that is religion is the discourse, language, and practice, or the means by which human society and culture is extended to include the non-human.